Hello, and welcome to the Master Showcase, a Masters Conference series. The Master Showcase is a series of recordings of discussions with industry leaders within the legal community. We'll be getting started with today's chat in just a moment, but before we begin, just a few program details. My name is Kevin Clark, and I'm an attorney in Dallas, Texas, and I'm head of the Litigation Support Department at Thompson Knight, as well as chairman of the board of the Masters Conference. I'm also the host of the Master Showcase. Please note that the views expressed by all parties on the Master Showcase belong solely to the participants themselves and do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of their organizations. And now to get started with today's Master Showcase. Today's guest is George Finney. George is the Chief Security Officer at SMU and is a best-selling author. He is a subject matter expert on cybersecurity and has a unique background in legal and physical security. He recently wrote a book on cybersecurity, Well Aware, Master the 9 Cybersecurity Habits to Protect Your Future. It is a great read that focuses on human elements and habits everyone should focus on and master. Finney argues that cybersecurity is not a technology problem, it's a people problem. The habits George outlines should be commonplace, and his book is a must read. In today's discussion, George discusses cybersecurity's 9 habits in the context of the recent SolarWinds breach. Welcome, George.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Kevin. I'm really excited to talk to you guys today. I know I've worked with the Masters conferences before, but I'm just so excited that the book won the Book of the Year award by Business Class News last year, and it's been doing so well. And one of the reasons I wrote the book wasn't just for cybersecurity experts, right? It was really to provide a non-technical way of introducing folks to security who maybe are in the legal profession or in sales or accounting. And we've all read books like Good to Great or the 7 Habits, and this I think it works along those same lines, but because I think everyone's future is tied closely together with cybersecurity, right? It doesn't matter if you're in a law practice. You need to protect your client's information. You need to understand cybersecurity. I think the 9 habits is what will help get us there. I wanted to kind of give a working example of how you can apply the 9 habits in the real world. Obviously the biggest topic right now in cyber is SolarWinds. I'm going to use SolarWinds as the case study to kind of give you an example of how the 9 cybersecurity habits could apply, in your profession or for your clients. First, we'll start off with the 9 habits. I won't read them, but the idea was, I started out. We know that 40 to 50% of all human behaviors are based on habits. So to be able to move the needle, to have a real outcome, we need to stop thinking about cybersecurity as a skill that you can just watch a video online and learn. It's really something that you have to habitually change. It's more like a discipline. It's not just one behavior, right? We didn't evolve to have cybersecurity as a habit. There are a lot of smaller constellations of behaviors that work together as habits. And I created the 9 habits. I actually reverse engineered them. I looked at all the advice, the tips and tricks we give when it comes to cybersecurity. And I kind of, I've got this gigantic spreadsheet with hundreds of rows of all those tips and tricks. And I started to kind of distill them down into categories. And based on those categories, I took a look at psychology and neuroscience. And there really are specific parts of the brain that each one of these habits align with, that you can use to kind of hack your own behaviors, if you will, and change for the better to be more secure, or help your communities or your families be more secure as well. So we'll start with literacy. And the literacy doesn't mean what we think it means. It doesn't mean you have to be, a cybersecurity expert. It doesn't mean that you have to be George to be safe online. The literal definition of literacy is just that you need to be able to recognize the words on a page. And I think with cybersecurity, we need to have enough of a foundation to have a conversation, to have the building blocks to build understanding from there. SolarWinds, there's this attack timeline. We found in December of 2020 that this particular threat actor had been in the SolarWinds network for over a year. They had owned their code repository and were actually pushing their malicious code through SolarWinds' normal update service when you patched your SolarWinds server. So that's kind of how the malware got in. And in terms of literacy, this is essentially a supply chain attack, right? So Microsoft or FireEye were compromised in part because of one of their suppliers. And there's a lot of talk with this, we don't necessarily trust all of the software that we have, and we shouldn't. We patch Adobe all the time, but the fact that this exploited that was a really big deal. And by the way that this exploit was discovered was actually, there's a lot of talk about automation in security, a lot of talk about AI. And there were a number of companies, very large cybersecurity companies, that detected this SolarWinds breach potentially months before FireEye disclosed it. But it turns out the way we found out about it, this is a fascinating story, was a brand new person in cybersecurity, right? They just, one of the low-level cybersecurity engineers at FireEye was hunting down a weird anomaly with two-factor authentication, and this person, just kept after it and actually called the person's, whose account maybe was being used for two-factor. A weird phone number popped up, and it turned out the salesperson didn't know what that phone number was, and from there, they actually researched and found. So, I think the takeaway here is, anybody can play a role in cybersecurity. You don't have to have, a decade of experience, a master's degree, all the certifications. I think it really just takes a basic understanding and, a passion for protecting your community and making a difference. So the other part of literacy that I think we all need to understand is, what is it that SolarWinds actually did in our environment? And we've got a lot of software out there that runs on our networks. We've got cloud-based software out there. SolarWinds had the keys to the kingdom already, right? It runs the insides of your network. It's got access to make changes potentially to network routers and switches and firewalls. So in other words, it was in the core of your network. And so one of the first things that SolarWinds did when it was this particular malware, when you were compromised, it would call out to a command and control domain. A command and control domain is just the cloud version of the bad guys SaaS service. And I think the first question you should ask is, if you have a piece of software that has access to your crown jewels, the core of your network, should it have direct unfettered access to the internet to call out to command and control domains? Shouldn't that be something you're watching for? And of course, the answer is yes. But you have to be literate. You have to understand the where the crown jewels are in your network in order to protect yourself. And in this case, the companies that were compromised, I think in some part, had their SolarWinds servers exposed to the internet, which played a big risk. But I think we need to look at all of our services. And the first thing that I recommend is companies create a risk register, right? You need to know where all of your devices are, where your software is, where your data is, and think about the risks to those. I also think about doing what I call a pre-mortem. We're all good at doing post-mortems to find out what went wrong, but if you do a pre-mortem, you think about what could go wrong, and you act before you're compromised. The second habit is skepticism. And if the first habit is learning to read, the second habit is learning not to believe everything you read. There's been a lot of talk about fake news lately, but think about at a simple level, not necessarily SolarWinds, but how do you find out what's true and what's false? You have to apply skepticism. You have to apply your thought process to find valid sources that you do trust. There's this great quote from Winston Churchill, but if democracy is the best thing that we have, the best approach in cybersecurity that we have is an approach called zero trust. And it's, just like democracy, it's the worst form of network architecture. There are lots of issues with its scalability, but it's the best thing that we've come up with so far. And zero trust really just breaks security down into three principles. It's secure access, it's least privilege, and log everything. It's weird, but the weird thing about zero trust is that these things evolved over time, right? Logging everything, for example, we didn't used to do that because logging is expensive. You have to log a lot of stuff, and it takes storage, and that's not something that we typically did in the past. Today we can do that. Least privilege makes sense. Secure access makes sense, with two-factor authentication, but it also has to do with your principles and your protocols, right? So, you want to make sure that with HR, you're terminating people on time and you're removing their access when they no longer need it, for example. Some people think about zero trust as an architecture. I really think of it as a philosophy that can guide your whole business. Stephen Covey, in his Speed of Trust, he talks about trust not necessarily as a spectrum, like on one hand you have trust, on the other hand you have untrust. He thinks of it as a matrix. So you can have both trust and skepticism at the same time in order to have what he calls good judgment. From there, vigilance I think of as a directive skepticism. And we know we can't be, skeptical all the time. We need to focus on the things that we know are we need to protect the most, or we need to focus on the threats that we've heard of, that are impacting other of our peers. And so, the interesting thing about SolarWinds, some of the payloads that we were seeing, we came up with names for. So, you might have heard of Sundrop or Raindrop or Sunburst. Those are all, kind of personifications of this particular attack. And that's one of the challenges that we have in cybersecurity is, everything is invisible in a way. And in order to protect ourselves, we need to be able to put a face to the name. And so, starting, probably 5 or 6 years ago, we started getting logos for these attacks, right? We weren't just giving them cute names like Heartbleed. We actually came up with a physical representation. So, when you're seeing that posted on social media or on blogs or articles or whatever, we started to give a face to the name, and that actually helps us. It helps us focus, and I think it's resulted in us being able to respond faster. We get patches pushed out faster because we can see things in a much more concrete way, and that's really the way our brains work, right? We're designed to be vigilant against kind of known threats, right? We want to give a name to the boogeyman in order to help protect our communities against that. And so one of the things I talk about in terms of vigilance is it always comes back to phishing. And there's this I think myth that cybersecurity training doesn't necessarily work, and phishing, we're always going to be vulnerable. But actually, based on some neuroscience research, we know that people are really good at making decisions early in the morning. That's when our problem-solving skills naturally are best. And in the afternoons, because of circadian rhythms, that actually, goes away. So, they've studied, doctors. Doctors make more mistakes in surgeries in the afternoons than they do in mornings. Students, when they take a test, the same student taking the same test will perform worse in the afternoon than in the morning. And the same is true for cybersecurity. So the red line, actually, I've sent over 20,000 simulated phishing messages to my users, and so I graph them, over the course of a day, and as it turns out, the folks, are 8 to 10 times more likely to click on a phishing message in the afternoon. And I realized I also had data on whether or not folks report phishing messages. So I went back to our tickets and found that users are also 3 times more likely to report those phishing messages in the morning than in the afternoon. So we know that we're going to be naturally more susceptible, more vulnerable in the afternoons, or less vigilant, if you will. But we also know, right, that if people are actually able to recognize phishing messages better in the morning, then I think that means that our training is working. So that's a good thing. And if our training is working, is there a way to help educate our users, to help protect them when they're most vulnerable? And so the technique I've come up with is called slow down and frown. So you might have heard of the advice that if you smile for 30 seconds, you can trick your brain into becoming happy or release endorphins. The same is also true for frowning. The same research suggests that you can become more vigilant. And I actually tested this on my users, and they let me at a university, I guess, experiment on people. But I did an experiment that I had a group of people in my control group, and then I taught the other group to frown while they're reading email. And as it turns out, that group of users that we trained to frown were 43% less likely to click on a phishing message. That's all they were doing, right? They were just frowning. So it's fascinating, but they were also 3 times more likely to report those phishing messages, right? Which is a huge difference when it comes to being able to respond quickly to phishing campaigns coming in against you. And frowning is totally free, and we all hate it when people tell us to smile. So collectively harnessing our resting frowny faces, I think could have a huge impact on cybersecurity. From there, we go to secrecy, and secrecy is really, I think, the dividing line between what should be public and what should be private. In terms of businesses, we all have data classification rules, right? Secret or top secret. All of those help, kind of guide us. But again, to really make a difference, you have to make it personal, right? So if I were to ask you what your deepest, darkest, most embarrassing secret is, you'd know instantly what that secret was, and you'd also know instantly that you weren't going to tell me whatever that secret was. And we need to be able to translate that same personality into secrecy, right? You need to make your client data, protecting your client data, personal. And the way that the security community talks about it, there's a set of controls, the CIS Top 20, the Center for Internet Security, and the number one thing that they say to do is to create an inventory of devices. The number 2 thing they say to do is to create an inventory of software in your environment. But you have to make that personal, right? The studies out there that have looked at, say doctors again, to get doctors to wash their hands, they put up pictures of patients, real patients. So to remind the doctors that it's not just some abstract concept. You have to make it real. You have to make it personal for people to make it resonate. There's also this concept, again, in cybersecurity for threat modeling. So what are we? There are 4 steps. What are we working on? What could go wrong? Right. This is again very similar to a post or pre-mortem. What are we going to do about it? And then afterwards, did we do a good job? And so, thinking about implementing SolarWinds in your network, think about what could go wrong, right? The software could be compromised. We don't trust any software, right? We patch everything. We know to expect vulnerabilities. What are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to put the right protections in place. We don't necessarily start with the controls. We want to make sure we're supporting the business. We want to understand the objectives of the business. And then we want to have a process for iterating on, well, did we do a good enough job? No, then we do something different. And we ask the question again, did we do a good enough job? And we change and adapt based on, how the bad guys out there are adapting and learning. So I'll kind of pause here. The first 4 habits are really all things that you can do internal to yourself. You can think about your own, secrets, you can be vigilant, but the final 5 habits focus on external things, right? They're all habits that involve other people, and culture, I think, is one of the biggest things that you can do to make a difference in cybersecurity. So I did this study. I looked at all of the companies that were breached in 2018, and there's this saying in leadership circles. It's by Peter Drucker. He says that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And what he means by that is, executives come in and they have these visions for what they want to accomplish, and they don't align their vision or their strategy with the culture of their organizations. And so those strategies fail because the culture didn't support them. And I thought, gosh, the same thing is true for cybersecurity. So when I looked at the companies that were breached, I cross-referenced that data with companies' culture ratings on Glassdoor.com. And what I found is that companies with a bad culture were 3 times more likely to have been the victim of a data breach. And this is irrespective of the technologies they used, the industries they were in, the geography, the number of people at their companies, right? Culture is kind of the leading indicator of whether or not a company is going to be breached. And I think that has to do with, exceptions, taking shortcuts, right? If your employees don't feel valued, if they don't feel like what they can do will make a difference, then they're not going to try and make a difference. And when it comes to cybersecurity, that can have a huge impact. We know from research, and again, leaders are reading these books and hearing these speakers that tell them, companies are more profitable, they're more successful when they have a great culture, but they can also be more secure. And I think about that in terms of security and the SolarWinds breach. I think there was, I probably shouldn't talk about the ongoing litigation with SolarWinds, but there's some claims out there that the executives maybe knew about it. Maybe they sold some stock before the issue was disclosed, and that kind of culture sends a message, right? We'll hear whether that plays out in the SolarWinds case or not. But I think that's, again, culture will make the biggest difference because collectively we have to work together. And culture is that representation of all of our collective beliefs and expectations. So this is kind of the graph that shows that. And, again, I think having a lower than average culture, being 3 times more like there's no other number in cybersecurity that shows this big of a difference. And I think that culture can support being diligent. So you have to do a lot of work to prepare for a cybersecurity incident. You probably are working with your clients to develop incident response plans, but that's one of the biggest things that will determine success is if you have a plan in place before a breach happens, right? After a breach is already too late. And it doesn't, you don't just have to have a plan in place, you have to have practiced that plan. And like we talked about, with threat modeling, you have to have gone through the process of testing it to know, hey, is this the best plan? Attacks have evolved. Should we have changed our plans? So tabletop exercises are a great example of diligence. So in the case of SolarWinds, we know that there was a SolarGate backdoor. We know that the malware dropped Cobalt Strike backdoors. But we also know that a lot of modern AV, the next gen antivirus products out there natively blocked Cobalt Strike backdoors. They might not have detected SolariGate, and in part that's because SolarWinds signed the certificates that said that SolariGate malware was actually a part of their software package, which in one sense is why the SolarWinds compromise was so devastating. But still, even after it started doing stuff, you should have been able to block it. Again, your normal firewall policies should have blocked SolarWinds, SolariGate malware from calling out to the command and control networks to connect to it. But this is something that you can be practicing, and I think this diligence factor also brings up an issue that I call the cybersecurity poverty line. So we know, JP Morgan Chase, right? They have more employees than all of SMU. Their annual cybersecurity budget is probably more than SMU's endowment, right? And they spend that every year. And compare that with a small company that maybe has 100 employees, which is not necessarily a small business. But until you get, say, more than 10 million in revenue, generally speaking, most companies can't have a single cybersecurity employee. You might be lucky to have a single IT employee at that point. It's very expensive to do cybersecurity well, and I think that there's this divide between the haves and the have-nots. We know that 50% of businesses in the United States are small businesses. We know in the state of Texas that 50% of law practices are sole practitioner practices with less than 5 employees. It's very difficult to do cybersecurity well at scale, and I think that's one of the reasons why we work together to create the 9 habits. Is we need something that's not going to be a 6-figure expense to help make us secure. We need to work as a country to make sure that we're getting cybersecurity right, because the bad guys know that it's going to be really hard to go hack JP Morgan, and the rest of us are a target. And we have to kind of overcome the cybersecurity poverty line, and the way we get there is by talking about it, right? Being aware of it. And I think that brings us to the issue of community, right? So community, we know that we're not safe on our own. The way we've evolved as human beings is to form communities, form mutual protection, right? I like to say that security is in our DNA, because we've evolved as social animals to work together for mutual protection. And the way this plays out in cybersecurity, the CISA issued an emergency directive back in December. They've only ever issued 5 emergency directives, and this was the 5th one. So they put a call out to everyone to let them know that, hey, this is a really bad deal. And for the most part, we responded very quickly because of that. We also work together as a community to help respond to threats in general, right? So there's this concept called an Information Security Advisory Council. And there are a number of ISACs out there. This is just kind of a short list. I'm a member of the REN ISAC, which is the Research Education Network ISAC. But there are a number of industry-based information security advisory councils that share intel on threats. They share ongoing attacks, and IP addresses from where those attacks are coming from. They share information about, hey, what software is out there, and are you guys seeing issues with this? So we might be competitors in each of those industries, but we've got to share information in order to get better. I really believe that security is in your DNA. The 8th habit is mirroring, and once we participate in communities, we need to be able to understand what information we're we're leaking and sharing, and we've got to get better based on that feedback, right? So one thing that we tell people in the cybersecurity space is to look at your social media profile as, from an anonymous perspective. There are tools in most social media software to help you do that. But you've got to have that mirror. And this is kind of a picture of what you might have done if you had done a code analysis on the software that you were running. And we recommend, folks do pen test, right? Penetration test is when you hire a third-party group of hackers to look at you from an outside perspective, and having that mirror helps you get better. And you can do that as an individual, as a community, or as an organization. But we know that we're all made up of blind spots, right? We're biologically wired to have blind spots, even in our own eyes. And the way we biologically have evolved to get around those blind spots is to have multiple perspectives, and we have to be open to that. And one of the ways we do that is by speaking truth to power. It's kind of hard to hear sometimes that maybe we don't have a full perspective, and we have to be open to getting that outside perspective. And the final habit is deception. So deception itself is kind of gets a bad rap. We don't like lying, but we also know from Sun Tzu or others that deception is the best way to get to know what our enemy intends to do. And deception is free. We don't have to spend a lot of money. Again, thinking back to the security poverty line, to help defend ourselves and to learn our enemies. And I think deception really does feed back into the literacy habit, but it also delays it. It consumes the time and resources of our attackers, so that they're not out there attacking others. Deception technologies are breadcrumbs, decoys, lures, or beacons. All of those different approaches help us to delay or inform us about what the threat actors are doing out there. Again, going back to the SolarWinds example, once we see what the malware is doing, we understand how the threat actors are operating. We understand that they were after credentials. This was really a backdoor. Once they got in, they were getting admin credentials, and they were moving to other servers or devices in our environment. They wanted to preserve the backdoor in SolarWinds. Right? They didn't want to draw any attention to that. But we saw them moving into to the two-factor systems. We saw them migrating to other servers in our respective environments. Again, trying not to call attention to the backdoor, but it also kind of gives us an idea of what they were after in our environments, right? We can kind of map those where they were going from those servers. And there's some estimates that the Russians, again, we're assuming they're a Russian group, could have had 1,000 employees over the course of that 9 months working on all of the different intrusions that they were working on simultaneously. In terms of, we wouldn't have been able to know, the capabilities of these threat actors out there unless we kind of saw them in action. And I think knowing that this was their target, can help inform us. There are other threat actors out there, though, right? Some others are more interested in financial gain, deploying ransomware. Some others out there are more interested in intellectual property theft, and certainly that's a big issue, particularly in the legal industry, where we do have a lot of intellectual property for all of our respective clients. With that, I'll kind of pause. Kevin, you can jump in with any questions. But I've got a couple of other cybersecurity books out there, but I definitely recommend, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me on Twitter.
Right. No, George, thank you very much. This is a great discussion on the 9 cybersecurity habits, and I'm very happy that you were able to tie it into this recent SolarWinds breach. So very good. So George, thank you very much for coming on the Master Showcase. Again, everybody, the book is well aware. master the 9 cybersecurity habits to protect your future. And George is a great author and expert in this area. So we really thank you for coming on board and sharing today.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
Very much. Excellent.